I stood at attention as my parents' faces drained of color, their confident smirks melting into expressions of pure terror. The same woman they'd dismissed as worthless now wore the insignia of a commanding officer, and their fate rested entirely in my hands. Cadet Thompson, I said coldly to my father, who was trembling in his ill-fitting uniform. Drop and give me 50. Now. But let me back up. You see, this wasn't my first life. In my previous existence, I'd been Elena Hartwell, the disappointing daughter who never quite measured up. My parents, Margaret and Richard Hartwell, had made it abundantly clear from childhood that I was their greatest failure. While they lavished attention on my younger brother Marcus, grooming him for success in the family's political dynasty, I was treated like an unwelcome burden. Elena's just not leadership material, my mother would tell her socialite friends, her voice dripping with disdain. Some children are born to follow, I suppose. My father was no better. A former military officer turned a defense contractor. He'd built his fortune on government connections and ruthless business practices. To him, I represented everything weak about the modern generation. Too soft, too emotional, too idealistic. The final betrayal came when I was 18. I'd worked tirelessly to earn admission to Harvard Law School, dreaming of making a difference in the world. But the night before my interview, I overheard my parents in their study. "We can't let her embarrass the family name," my mother was saying. "One phone call to Dean Morrison and her application disappears. We'll tell her she was rejected." "Good thinking," my father replied. "That money would be better invested in Marcus's campaign fund anyway. Elena can work as a secretary somewhere, know her place." I was devastated. They'd stolen my future without a second thought. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came 3 years later when I discovered they'd been systematically draining my trust fund, money my grandmother had left specifically for my education, to finance Marcus's political career. When I confronted them, they didn't even bother denying it. "You weren't using it," my father said with a shrug. "Marcus has real potential. You're just... you..." I died in a car accident that night, driving home in tears from that confrontation. The last thing I remembered was my car spinning off the highway in the rain, my vision blurring as I whispered a prayer for justice that would never come, or so I thought. I woke up gasping, my 16-year-old heart pounding in my chest, staring at the familiar ceiling of my childhood bedroom. The same hideous floral wallpaper my mother had chosen without consulting me. The same narrow window that looked out onto the garden where I'd spent countless hours hiding from family gatherings where I was either ignored or openly mocked. At first, I thought it was just a vivid nightmare. But as the days passed and I watched the exact same events unfold that I remembered from my first life, the impossible truth became undeniable. I had been given a second chance. The morning after I'd awakened in my 16-year-old body, my parents called another one of their family meetings. Really just opportunities for them to announce decisions they'd already made about my life without my input. "We're sending you to Blackwater Military Academy," my father declared, his voice carrying that tone of absolute authority he used when he wanted to make it clear that discussion wasn't welcome. "Maybe they can knock some discipline into you." My mother nodded approvingly, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her coffee cup. "It's all arranged. You leave next week. The tuition is quite expensive, but we've decided it's a worthwhile investment in your character development." In my first life, I'd begged and pleaded, promising to do better, to be the daughter they wanted. I'd cried and bargained and made myself even smaller than they already saw me. This time, I simply smiled. "That sounds perfect," I said, watching their faces falter with confusion. "Thank you for this opportunity." They exchanged glances, clearly expecting the hysterical breakdown that had characterized my reaction in my previous life. My father frowned, suspicion creeping into his expression. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Elena," he said slowly. "Your mother and I were prepared for another one of your dramatic outbursts." "Those days are behind me," I replied, and I meant it. The girl who had broken down crying at every harsh word was gone forever. In her place sat a woman with 34 years of combined life experience, fueled by righteous anger and armed with foreknowledge of every test and trial that awaited. Blackwater Military Academy wasn't just any military school. I knew that from my first life, though I'd wasted the opportunity then. It was an elite institution that fed directly into the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. The Commandant, General Morrison, was a living legend who personally mentored only the most exceptional cadets. In my previous existence, I'd spent my time there wallowing in self pity and mediocrity, counting down the days until I could escape back to civilian life. This time would be fundamentally different. The moment I stepped off the bus at Blackwater, I felt like I was coming home. The sprawling campus, with its red brick buildings and perfectly maintained grounds, represented everything my family had tried to deny me. A place where merit mattered more than birth, where strength was earned rather than inherited, where the content of your character determined your worth rather than the size of your trust fund. During my first week, while other new cadets struggled to adapt to the harsh discipline and rigid structure, I thrived. When Drill Sergeant Hayes got in my face during morning PT, screaming about my pathetic civilian weakness, I didn't flinch. When we were forced to navigate obstacle courses in freezing rain at 5 in the morning, I pushed harder than anyone else, my body remembering the athletic conditioning I'd developed in my previous life before depression and despair had sapped my will to maintain it. Most importantly, when the inevitable hazing began, older cadets trying to break the spirits of newcomers through psychological warfare and physical intimidation, I turned it around on them with tactics I'd learned from watching my parents manipulate people for years. "Is that really the best you can do?" I asked Cadet Williams, a third year who'd been systematically destroying my bunk and hiding my gear. He'd cornered me in the barracks after lights out, clearly expecting tears and begging. Because honestly, after living with my family for 16 years, this feels like a vacation. The unexpected response threw him off balance, and I pressed my advantage. "You know what real psychological warfare looks like? It's not petty pranks and stolen property. It's being told every day of your life that you're worthless while watching mediocre people get handed everything you've worked for. It's having your own parents steal your future and then act like they're doing you a favor. What you're doing is amateur hour." By the end of my first month, the hazing had stopped. Not because I'd complained to the authorities, that would have marked me as weak, but because I'd earned a reputation as someone who was genuinely harder than the circumstances they could create for me. But it was in the academic and leadership courses where I truly began to shine. Professor Williams would present complex tactical scenarios, and I'd provide solutions that left even senior cadets speechless. I remembered details from military documentaries I'd watched in my first life, techniques from leadership books I'd read while working dead-end jobs, insights gained from years of observing how power really worked in my family's political circles. "Remarkable," General Morrison said during one of our strategy sessions in my second semester. "Your tactical thinking is beyond your years, Cadet Hartwell. Have you considered a career in military intelligence?" If only he knew how literally true that statement was. But I simply nodded respectfully and replied, "I'm open to wherever the Army believes I can serve most effectively, sir." General Morrison was exactly as I remembered him from my first life. A man who'd risen from enlisted ranks to become one of the most respected military leaders of his generation. What I hadn't appreciated in my previous existence was how carefully he observed the cadets under his command, constantly evaluating not just their academic performance, but their character, their resilience, their potential for real leadership. "Tell me about your family background, Cadet Hartwell," he said during one of our individual mentoring sessions. In my first life, I'd given him a sanitized version of the truth, too ashamed to admit how thoroughly my own parents had rejected me. This time, I was strategic in my honesty. "My father is Richard Hartwell of Hartwell Defense Solutions," I said. "He's built a successful business providing equipment and services to military contractors. My mother comes from old political money. They're both very focused on my younger brother's future in politics." "And where do you fit into those plans?" General Morrison asked, his keen eyes studying my expression. "I don't," I replied simply. "They see me as a disappointment who needed to be sent away before I could embarrass them further. But I'm grateful for that perspective, sir. It's freed me to focus on becoming the person I want to be rather than trying to meet someone else's expectations." Something shifted in General Morrison's expression, a flicker of approval, perhaps even protectiveness. I'd learned in my first life that he had a particular soft spot for cadets who'd overcome adversity, but I'd been too wrapped up in my own self-pity to recognize or capitalize on that then. By my second year, I'd been promoted to squad leader. The 10 cadets under my command came from diverse backgrounds: scholarship kids from inner city schools, legacy admits whose families had military traditions stretching back generations, international students whose governments had sent them to learn American military doctrine. What they all shared was a growing loyalty to me that went beyond mere respect for rank. I helped struggling cadets with their studies, remembering how it felt to be overlooked and underestimated. When Cadet Patel was failing calculus because his high school hadn't adequately prepared him for college-level mathematics, I spent my free time tutoring him until he not only passed but excelled. When Cadet Johnson was being harassed by upper-class cadets because of his rural Southern accent, I made it clear that anyone who had a problem with him would answer to me personally. "Why do you care so much about helping us?" Cadet Martinez asked me one evening as we studied together in the library. "You could focus on your own advancement. You're already at the top of the class rankings." "Because no one should have to face challenges alone," I replied, thinking of all the times in my first life when a helping hand or word of encouragement might have changed everything. We're stronger when we lift each other up. Word spread throughout the academy that Elena Hartwell was someone who lifted others up rather than tearing them down. My squad consistently outperformed expectations, not just individually, but as a cohesive unit. Our tactical exercises became legendary for their creativity and effectiveness. Our academic performance was so strong that Professor Williams began using our group projects as examples for other classes. Meanwhile, my parents barely acknowledged my achievements. When I called home with news of my promotion to squad leader, they responded with distracted, "That's nice, dear," responses, before launching into detailed updates about Marcus's latest triumphs at his prestigious private school. "Marcus scored 2 goals in last week's lacrosse game," my mother gushed. "The coach says he has real potential for an Ivy League scholarship." "That's wonderful," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. In my first life, these conversations had crushed my spirit. Now they simply reinforced my determination to prove them wrong about everything. "How are your grades, Elena?" my father asked, though his tone suggested he was asking out of obligation rather than genuine interest. "I'm currently ranked first in my class," I said. "Well, that's unexpected," my mother said, and I could practically hear her frowning through the phone. "I suppose the military environment agrees with you. It's good that you've found something you're adequate at." Adequate. Even when forced to acknowledge my success, they couldn't resist diminishing it. Perfect. Let them continue to underestimate me while I built something they couldn't even comprehend. By my 3rd year, I'd been promoted to Cadet Battalion Commander, the highest-ranking student in the Academy's 150-year history. The promotion came with privileges and responsibilities that extended far beyond the typical cadet experience. I had my own office, my own staff, and input into Academy policy decisions. More importantly, I had begun building a network of relationships that would serve me well in the years to come. And General Morrison had taken me under his wing in ways that went beyond normal mentorship. He included me in strategy meetings with visiting military officials, introduced me to influential alumni who held key positions throughout the defense establishment, and began grooming me for admission to West Point with his personal recommendation. "You have a rare combination of tactical brilliance and genuine leadership ability," he told me during one of our private meetings. "The Army needs officers who can think strategically while never forgetting that their ultimate responsibility is to the soldiers under their command." "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he replied. "But Elena, I want you to understand something. The path you're on will lead to significant responsibility and power. Use it wisely. Use it to protect those who can't protect themselves." His words resonated deeply with me, connecting to the core motivation that drove everything I did: the determination to ensure that what happened to me in my first life would never happen to anyone else under my protection. The Academy's annual military ball was held each spring, a formal event where cadets could invite family members to celebrate their achievements. In my first life, my parents had declined to attend, claiming they were too busy with Marcus's baseball season. This time, I decided to test whether my accomplishments had changed their priorities at all. "I'd like to invite you and Father to the military ball," I told my mother during one of our weekly phone calls. "As battalion commander, I'll be giving a speech to the assembled guests. It would mean a lot to have family there." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Oh, Elena, that does sound nice, but your father and I have already committed to attending Marcus's academic awards ceremony that same weekend. You understand how important this is for his college applications? Of course. Even when I achieved the highest honor in the Academy's history, Marcus's routine awards ceremony took precedence. In my first life, this rejection had devastated me. Now it simply provided useful data for my long-term planning. I understand completely, I said. Family comes first. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, my mother replied, relief evident in her voice. Perhaps we can plan a visit some other time. We both knew that visit would never happen, and I was perfectly fine with that. Let them continue to dismiss me while I accumulated real power and influence. Their absence from my achievements would make their eventual reckoning all the sweeter. The military ball proceeded without them, and I delivered a speech about honor, service, and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. General Morrison introduced me to visiting dignitaries, including General Patricia Hayes, the Army's highest-ranking female officer, who would later become instrumental in my career advancement. Impressive young woman, General Hayes told General Morrison after my speech. She reminds me of myself at that age. Hungry, determined, and absolutely uncompromising when it comes to doing what's right. She's going to be a general herself someday, General Morrison replied. Mark my words. After graduating summa cum laude from Blackwater with every military honor the Academy could bestow, I was accepted into West Point with General Morrison's enthusiastic recommendation. My parents were mildly surprised, but still managed to make it about Marcus somehow. Well, I suppose the military might suit you after all, my mother said over dinner during my brief visit home before reporting to West Point. It's not like you have the intelligence for law or business like your brother. Marcus, now a senior in high school and already accepted to Harvard for the following fall, nodded patronizingly. Ellen has always been more of a follower than a leader. The military will give her structure and tell her what to do. It's perfect for her personality type. I just smiled and nodded, already planning my next moves. They saw the military as a place for people who couldn't succeed in the real world of business and politics. They had no conception of the true power structure in American society, the way that military leadership intersected with intelligence agencies, defense contractors, and the highest levels of government. They were about to spend the next 2 decades learning exactly how wrong they were about everything. At West Point, I threw myself into my studies with the same focused intensity I'd brought to Blackwater. But now I had specific strategic objectives beyond simply excelling academically. I double majored in international relations and cybersecurity, understanding that the future of warfare and intelligence would increasingly depend on technological superiority and information dominance. My professors were uniformly impressed with the depth of my strategic thinking and my ability to synthesize complex information into actionable intelligence assessments. Dr. Sarah Chen, who led the cybersecurity program, became another crucial mentor. You have an intuitive understanding of how information flows through complex systems, she told me after I delivered a presentation on Chinese cyber warfare capabilities that drew on knowledge I'd gained from documentaries and news reports from my first life. Have you considered specializing in intelligence analysis? Absolutely, I replied. I want to understand how our adversaries think and operate. The better we understand them, the better we can protect our interests and our people. Dr. Chen connected me with internship opportunities at the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I spent my summers learning the practical applications of theoretical knowledge. These experiences not only enhanced my technical skills, but also allowed me to begin building relationships within the intelligence community that would prove invaluable in later years. During my time at West Point, I also made sure to stay informed about my family's activities. Marcus's college career proceeded exactly as it had in my first life. Mediocre grades, fraternity parties, and a political science major chosen more for its networking opportunities than any genuine interest in governance. My parents continued to lavish resources on his future, funding unpaid internships and study abroad programs that built his resume, while contributing nothing meaningful to his actual capabilities. More concerning was what I learned about my father's business practices. Using the research skills I'd developed in my intelligence courses, I began investigating Hartwell Defense Solutions more thoroughly than I'd ever been able to do in my first life. what I discovered was deeply troubling. The company wasn't just profiting from government contracts, they were actively defrauding the military, overcharging for substandard equipment, billing for services never rendered, and most disturbingly, providing defective body armor and vehicle components that had directly contributed to American casualties overseas. My father had literally built his fortune on the blood of soldiers, many of whom were the same age as the cadets I'd served alongside at Blackwater. But I was patient. I was building something they couldn't understand: real power, earned through competence and sacrifice rather than inherited wealth and corruption. The evidence I was gathering would be useful when the time came, but I needed to be in a position of sufficient authority to act on it effectively. I graduated from West Point at the top of my class, commissioned as a second lieutenant in military intelligence. My parents attended the graduation ceremony, the first time they'd ever acknowledged one of my achievements with their physical presence, but even then, they managed to diminish the accomplishment. Second lieutenant, my father mused as we posed for photographs after the ceremony. Well, it's a start, I suppose. The real question is whether you can advance from there. Military promotion can be quite political, you know. If only he understood just how political it could be. My first assignment was to Fort Gordon in Georgia, where I underwent specialized training in signals intelligence and cyber warfare. The work was demanding and constantly evolving, requiring me to stay current with rapidly advancing technology while mastering the timeless principles of intelligence analysis and counterintelligence operations. But it was during my first deployment to Afghanistan that I truly began to make my mark. The knowledge I'd retained from my first life about how the conflict would unfold gave me an almost supernatural ability to anticipate enemy movements and identify potential threats before they materialized. Within 6 months, my intelligence assessments had prevented multiple attacks on American forces and led to the capture of several high-value targets. Lieutenant Hartwell has an extraordinary talent for pattern recognition and threat assessment. My commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, wrote in my first performance evaluation, "Her analytical capabilities are matched only by her dedication to the welfare of the soldiers whose lives depend on the accuracy of her intelligence products." Colonel Patterson became more than just a superior officer during that deployment. He became a friend, mentor, and eventually, much more. A career intelligence officer with tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and various classified assignments, he understood the burden of knowing that your analysis could mean the difference between life and death for American service members. "You carry a heavy weight for someone so young," he told me one evening as we reviewed intelligence reports in our operations center. "How do you maintain your focus under that kind of pressure?" "By remembering that every decision we make affects real people with families and futures," I replied. "That's not a burden, it's a privilege. These soldiers trust us to give them the information they need to come home safely. We can't let them down." It was during that conversation that I first saw something shift in James's expression. A recognition that I wasn't just another ambitious young officer, but someone who genuinely understood the moral weight of military leadership. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into something deeper, though we were both careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given our respective positions in the chain of command. My rapid promotion to first lieutenant came after I identified a sophisticated IED network that had been responsible for dozens of coalition casualties. The intelligence I developed led to a coordinated operation that dismantled the entire network and captured its leadership, including a bomb maker who'd been on the military's most wanted list for 3 years. Exceptional performance in high-pressure operational environment read my citation for the Bronze Star Medal I received for that work. Lieutenant Hartwell's analytical brilliance and unwavering dedication to mission success directly saved countless American lives. The award ceremony was small and informal, just the kind of recognition that meant something to soldiers rather than the flashy political theater my family was accustomed to. My parents didn't attend, of course. They were too busy with Marcus's law school applications to bother with their daughter's military honors. But General Morrison flew to Afghanistan for the ceremony, making time in his schedule as the new Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence to personally pin the medal to my uniform. "I told you that you'd be a general someday," he said quietly as we stood together after the formal ceremony. "This is just the beginning." "Thank you, sir, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a smile. I'm not done making your life difficult. I'm recommending you for the captain's career course ahead of schedule, followed by assignment to the Pentagon. It's time for you to start learning how the big picture fits together. The Pentagon assignment was a revelation. Working in the Defense Intelligence Agency's Strategic Analysis Division, I gained insight into the highest levels of national security decision-making. I was no longer just providing tactical intelligence for specific operations. I was contributing to the strategic assessments that shaped American foreign policy and military doctrine. My specialty became the intersection of cyber warfare and traditional military operations, an area where my technical background and operational experience gave me unique insights. The reports I produced found their way to the desks of cabinet officials and congressional committee chairs, influencing decisions that affected global stability. It was during this assignment that I also began to understand the full scope of the corruption in defense contracting that my father's company represented. From my position within the intelligence community, I had access to audit reports, whistleblower complaints, and classified assessments of contractor performance that painted a damning picture of systemic fraud throughout the industry. Hartwell Defense Solutions was far from the worst offender, but they were emblematic of the problem. Companies that prioritized profit over the lives of the soldiers who depended on their products. I began building a comprehensive file on their activities, knowing that someday I would be in a position to act on the information I was gathering. My promotion to captain came after I authored a strategic assessment of Chinese cyber capabilities that fundamentally changed how the Pentagon approached information security. The report was classified at the highest levels, but its recommendations led to billions of dollars in new cybersecurity investments and a complete overhaul of military network architecture. Captain Hartwell represents the future of military intelligence, General Hayes wrote in her endorsement of my promotion. Her ability to synthesize complex technical information with strategic military thinking makes her invaluable to our national security efforts. James, who had also been promoted and was now serving his own Pentagon assignment, was there when I received my captain's bars. Our relationship had evolved carefully over the years, always professional, but with an underlying understanding that something deeper was developing between us. "Congratulations, Captain," he said after the brief ceremony. "Ready for the next challenge?" "Always," I replied. "What do you have in mind?" "Command," he said simply. "It's time for you to start leading soldiers again, not just analyzing intelligence. General Morrison has arranged for you to take over a company in the 82nd Airborne. It's a good unit, but they've been through some difficult deployments. They need leadership they can trust." Command was indeed the next logical step in my career progression, but it also represented something more personal. An opportunity to put into practice all the lessons I'd learned about leadership and loyalty during my time at Blackwater and in subsequent assignments. The 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg was legendary for its combat effectiveness and esprit de corps. But Charlie Company had suffered significant casualties during recent deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Morale was low, retention was poor, and the soldiers had developed a cynical attitude toward military leadership that reminded me uncomfortably of my own feelings toward authority figures in my first life. My first meeting with the company's senior non-commissioned officers was tense and formal. These were combat veterans who'd seen too many young officers come and go, most of them more concerned with advancing their own careers than taking care of their soldiers. "Ma'am, with respect, we've had 4 different company commanders in the last 2 years," First Sergeant Rodriguez told me bluntly. "The men are tired of adjusting to new leadership styles and new priorities every few months." "I understand that frustration, First Sergeant," I replied. "And I want you to know that I'm not here to make my mark by changing everything the previous commanders did. I'm here to build on what works and fix what doesn't. But I can't do that without honest input from the NCOs who actually know these soldiers and understand their needs." Over the following weeks, I made it a point to learn every soldier's name, background, and personal circumstances. Private Johnson was supporting his younger sister's college tuition. Sergeant Martinez was dealing with a messy divorce that was affecting his focus. Specialist Wong was struggling with PTSD from his last deployment, but was afraid to seek help because he thought it might hurt his career. I addressed each situation individually, connecting soldiers with resources, advocating for them with higher headquarters when necessary, and, most importantly, demonstrating that their welfare was my primary concern as their commander. Captain Hartwell actually gives a damn about us, I overheard Sergeant Martinez telling a group of soldiers during evening chow. She's not just checking boxes and waiting for her next promotion. That respect translated into performance. Charlie Company's readiness ratings improved dramatically, retention rates increased, and most importantly, the soldiers regained confidence in themselves and their mission. When we deployed to Afghanistan for what would be my second combat tour, the unit performed with a cohesion and effectiveness that drew praise from brigade and division leadership. But it was during that deployment that I also received news that would set the final phase of my revenge plan in motion. James, now a lieutenant colonel serving as a strategic planner at Central Command, called me with information he'd obtained through official channels. Elena, I thought you should know, your father's company is being investigated by the Army Criminal Investigation Command. There have been some serious allegations about defective equipment. What kind of allegations? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Substandard body armor, mostly. Several soldiers have been killed or wounded when their protective equipment failed under fire. The manufacturer's quality control records show they knew about the defects, but shipped the equipment anyway to meet delivery deadlines. The irony was perfect. My father, who'd always dismissed my military service as beneath his notice, was about to be brought down by the very institution he'd been defrauding. But the investigation moved slowly, hampered by Hartwell Defense Solutions' political connections and expensive legal representation. My father used his relationship with Marcus, now a junior congressman who served on the House Armed Services Committee, to pressure investigators and delay proceedings. I realized that if justice was going to be served, I would need to be in a position to ensure it myself. My promotion to major came with assignment to the Military Intelligence Training Center at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, the same facility where my father's company held their primary government contract. The position made me responsible for training the next generation of military intelligence officers, while also overseeing security protocols for the base's extensive classified research and development programs. More importantly, it gave me oversight authority for all contractor operations on the installation, including regular security reviews and performance assessments that were entirely within my purview as base commander. And the first thing I did after assuming command was initiate a comprehensive review of all contractor relationships, citing routine security concerns that were completely legitimate given the sensitive nature of the work performed at Fort Devens. My team of investigators, all soldiers who'd served under me and trusted me implicitly, approached the task with the thoroughness and attention to detail that I'd trained them to apply to all intelligence operations. What they uncovered was even more damning than I'd expected. Hartwell Defense Solutions hadn't just provided defective equipment. They'd falsified quality control records, bribed inspection officials, and systematically overcharged the government for substandard products. The paper trail of fraud stretched back over a decade and involved millions of dollars in illegal profits. But I didn't just want to destroy their company. I wanted to destroy them personally, the way they'd tried to destroy me. While the investigation proceeded, I reached out to my parents for the first time in years, suggesting we arrange a meeting to discuss my father's upcoming contract renewal. I played the part of the dutiful daughter perfectly, hinting that I might be able to help expedite the approval process if we could work out some mutually beneficial arrangements. They agreed immediately, sensing an opportunity to exploit their military daughter for personal gain. The irony was delicious. They were so eager to use me that they never considered I might be using them. The meeting will be held here at Fort Devens, I told them over the phone. It's a formal military facility, so you'll need to report to the main gate as civilians seeking base access. Standard procedure. What they didn't know was that the moment they set foot on my base, they would be subject to military jurisdiction and military justice. The morning of our scheduled meeting, I stood in my office reviewing the final details of my plan. My aide, Captain Rodriguez, one of the former Blackwater cadets who'd requested assignment under my command, knocked on my door. "Ma'am, the civilians are here for your meeting. They've been processed through security and are waiting in conference room B." "Thank you, Captain. And the other arrangements?" "All in place, ma'am. The investigation team is standing by, and base security has been briefed on the situation." I straightened my uniform, checking my reflection in the window that overlooked the parade ground where young soldiers were conducting morning PT. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the broken, defeated girl my parents remembered. This woman wore the rank of major, commanded the respect of hundreds of soldiers, and held the power to bring justice to those who'd escaped it for far too long. Time to go, I murmured to myself. I walked into conference room B to find my parents waiting with confident smiles, clearly expecting to manipulate their naive military daughter into helping them secure another fraudulent contract. Marcus was there too, now a sitting congressman who'd undoubtedly been briefed on how to leverage his sister's position for mutual political and financial gain. Elena, my mother exclaimed, standing to embrace me. Look at you, so distinguished in your uniform. The embrace felt hollow and calculated, just like every gesture of affection I'd ever received from her. In my first life, I'd craved even these fake demonstrations of maternal love. Now they simply reinforced my resolve. My father nodded approvingly, his eyes taking in my rank insignia with newfound respect. Major, is it? Impressive. I always knew the military would be good for you. Gives you structure, purpose, a clear hierarchy to follow. The condescension was still there, barely concealed beneath a veneer of approval. Even now, faced with evidence of my success that dwarfed anything they'd achieved through their corruption, they couldn't resist the urge to diminish my accomplishments. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the chairs across from me. We have a lot to discuss. For the next 20 minutes, I let them talk. They laid out their expectations for the contract renewal, dropped hints about how family loyalty should influence my decision-making, and even had the audacity to suggest that approving their contract quickly might lead to opportunities for me in the private sector after my military service ended. Marcus was particularly crude in his approach, treating the conversation like a political deal-making session where family obligations were just another form of currency to be traded. Elena, you have to understand the bigger picture here, he said, leaning forward with the earnest expression he'd perfected during his political campaigns. Dad's company provides jobs for hundreds of people. The contracts we're discussing support entire communities. Sometimes the greater good requires us to be flexible about minor procedural issues. Minor procedural issues. That's how he characterized equipment failures that had killed American soldiers. I recorded every word through the digital surveillance system that monitored all meetings in the facility. Every casual admission of corruption, every callous dismissal of military casualties, every assumption that family loyalty trumped legal and ethical obligations. That's all very interesting, I said, when they finally finished their pitch. But before we discuss contract renewals, I think we need to address some irregularities in your company's previous performance. I slid a thick folder across the table, the culmination of months of investigation by my team. This contains documentation of systematic fraud spanning the last 12 years. Overcharging, non-delivery of services, falsification of quality control records, and most seriously, the provision of defective equipment that directly contributed to the deaths of 18 American service members. The color drained from their faces as they flipped through the evidence. Bank records showing kickbacks to procurement officials, email communications discussing ways to reduce manufacturing costs without informing customers, testimony from whistleblowing employees who'd been silenced through legal threats and financial payoffs. This is impossible, my father stammered, his hands shaking as he held the documents. These are just accounting errors, misunderstandings. No, I said coldly. These are federal crimes. Fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and dereliction of duty resulting in loss of American lives. My mother tried to recover, falling back on the manipulation tactics that had worked so well when I was young and vulnerable. Elena, sweetheart, surely we can work this out as a family. There's no need to involve outsiders in what amounts to simple business disagreements. Family? I repeated, my voice hard as steel. Is that what you called it when you stole my trust fund? When you sabotaged my Harvard application? When you spent 20 years telling me I was worthless while building your fortune on the graves of soldiers? Their shock was complete now. They'd never imagined that their dismissed, forgotten daughter might have discovered their crimes, or gained the power to do something about them. Marcus tried to salvage the situation with political bluster, his face flushing red as he realized how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. Elena, I'm a sitting member of Congress. You can't just... I can and I will, I interrupted. Your political position means nothing here. You're on a military installation, subject to military justice, and I have both the authority and the evidence to see that justice is served. I pressed a button on my desk phone. Captain Rodriguez, please escort our guests to the detention facility. They're being held pending transfer to federal custody. The door opened immediately, and 3 military police officers entered the room in full battle dress uniform. My parents' faces went through a rapid series of emotions: disbelief, panic, rage, and finally a dawning understanding of just how completely they'd been outmaneuvered. "You can't do this," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. The confident businessman who'd walked into my office an hour earlier had been replaced by a frightened old man facing the collapse of everything he'd built through corruption and exploitation. "We're your family." "No," I replied, standing to face them as the MPs moved into position. "Family protects each other. Family lifts each other up. Family doesn't steal from their children and build wealth on the graves of heroes. You're criminals who happen to share my DNA. Nothing more." As the MPs placed them in handcuffs, standard procedure for civilians being detained on military installations, my mother made one final attempt at emotional manipulation. "Elena, please. Think about what this will do to the family name. Think about your own reputation. People will say you betrayed your own parents." I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in either of my lives when dealing with my family. "I am thinking about the family name. I'm thinking about how I'm going to restore honor to it by ensuring that justice is finally served. And as for my reputation," I gestured to the walls of my office, decorated with commendations and photographs from my military service. "I think it can withstand association with doing the right thing." The investigation I'd initiated moved with the efficiency that only military justice could provide when properly motivated and thoroughly documented. Within weeks, federal prosecutors had built an airtight case based on the evidence my team had compiled. The media picked up the story, painting it as a David and Goliath tale of military integrity triumphing over corporate corruption. But the public didn't know the full scope of what I'd orchestrated. Using my position and the intelligence community connections I'd cultivated over years of exemplary service, I'd also triggered investigations into Marcus's campaign finances. The web of illegal contributions and money laundering that tied directly back to his parents' fraudulent contracts was even more extensive than I'd anticipated. His political career didn't just implode, it exploded in a scandal that reached into the highest levels of the House Armed Services Committee. More personally satisfying was the civil lawsuit I filed to recover my stolen trust fund. Armed with evidence of the forged documents and financial fraud that I'd been gathering since my Pentagon assignment, I not only recovered the original amount, but secured punitive damages that effectively bankrupted what remained of their legitimate assets. The criminal trials were a masterpiece of justice served cold and calculated. I attended every day of proceedings sitting in the gallery in full dress uniform with my growing collection of service ribbons and decorations visible to everyone in the courtroom. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. The decorated military officer whose service represented everything noble about American values, facing the family members whose greed had perverted those same values into instruments of personal enrichment. My father was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and involuntary manslaughter. The judge specifically cited the deaths of soldiers who'd relied on his defective equipment, noting that the defendant's actions represent a betrayal not just of legal obligations, but of the sacred trust placed in those who provide for our military's needs. My mother received 15 years as a co-conspirator who had knowingly benefited from the fraudulent schemes and participated in covering up evidence when investigations began. Her tearful plea for leniency, claiming she was merely a wife who'd trusted her husband's business judgment, fell on deaf ears when prosecutors presented evidence of her active participation in money laundering and witness intimidation. Marcus's sentence was 10 years for campaign finance violations, money laundering, and abuse of office. The political scandal had been so devastating that several other congressmen who'd received contributions from Hartwell Defense Solutions were forced to resign or chose not to seek re-election. But their punishment went beyond prison time. They'd built their entire identity around wealth, status, and social position. Now they were infamous, broke, and completely powerless. The society pages that had once celebrated their philanthropic activities and political connections now documented their fall from grace with the same breathless enthusiasm they'd once reserved for their triumphs. I walked out of the courthouse on the day of their sentencing to find a crowd of reporters waiting for my statement. "Justice has been served," I said simply, my voice carrying the authority that came from years of leading soldiers in life and death situations. The men and women who serve our country deserve better than to be betrayed by those who profit from their sacrifice. Today's verdict ensures that such betrayal carries consequences. A reporter called out from the crowd, "Major Hartwell, how does it feel to be responsible for your own family's imprisonment?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing that my words would be broadcast across the country and that my parents would likely see them from their prison cells. "I'm not responsible for their imprisonment," I said clearly. "I'm responsible for ensuring that their crimes didn't continue to cost American lives. If they'd chosen to honor their obligations to the soldiers who depended on their products, we wouldn't be here today. They made their choices. I made mine." The years that followed were a whirlwind of professional advancement and personal fulfillment that exceeded anything I could have imagined in my first life. My handling of the Hartwell Defense Solutions case had demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and competence that the military's senior leadership was looking for in the next generation of general officers. My promotion to lieutenant colonel came with assignment as Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence for the 16th State Airborne Corps, a position that put me in charge of intelligence operations for one of the Army's premier combat formations. The job was demanding and often required me to deploy to crisis zones around the world, but it also provided invaluable experience in strategic planning and operational leadership. During this period, I also began developing the personal relationships that would define the rest of my life. James and I had maintained our careful professional friendship throughout our respective career progressions. But as we both reached senior field grade ranks, we were finally in positions where a personal relationship wouldn't compromise military propriety. Our courtship was conducted with the same careful planning and attention to detail that we brought to our professional responsibilities. Dinner conversations often revolved around international security challenges and military doctrine, but gradually expanded to include discussions of the future we might build together. "I've been thinking about what comes next," James told me during one of our rare weekends together between deployments. We were walking through the gardens at Mount Vernon, taking advantage of a brief respite from our respective duties. "Professionally or personally?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the direction of his thoughts. "Both," he replied, stopping to face me beneath one of the estate's ancient oak trees. "Elena, we've both dedicated ourselves to serving something larger than our individual ambitions. But I think we could serve even more effectively together, as partners in every sense of the word." The proposal that followed was simple and perfect. No elaborate staging or unnecessary drama, just two people who understood each other completely, making a commitment to face whatever challenges lay ahead as a team. We were married in a small ceremony at the Cadet Chapel at West Point, with General Morrison officiating and many of our Blackwater and Military Academy classmates in attendance. The contrast with my parents' absence was noted but not dwelt upon. Everyone in attendance understood that families of choice often mattered more than families of birth. My promotion to colonel came shortly after our marriage, along with assignment as Director of Intelligence Analysis at the Defense Intelligence Agency. The position put me at the center of America's strategic intelligence efforts, responsible for producing the assessments that shaped national security policy at the highest levels. It was challenging work that required me to synthesize information from sources around the world, but it also provided insights into the broader patterns of international conflict and cooperation that would prove invaluable in later assignments. More importantly, it allowed me to mentor the next generation of intelligence officers, passing on the lessons I'd learned about the importance of integrity, competence, and loyalty to mission above self. During this period, I also received periodic updates on my family's circumstances through official channels. My father's health had deteriorated significantly during his imprisonment, with several heart attacks brought on by the stress of incarceration and the complete collapse of everything he'd worked to build. My mother had developed severe depression and spent most of her time in the prison medical facility, heavily medicated and largely disconnected from reality. Marcus had been attacked multiple times by fellow inmates who'd learned about his role in providing defective equipment to soldiers. Prison, it seemed, had its own form of justice for those who betrayed military personnel. I felt no sympathy for their suffering. They'd created their own hell through their choices, just as I'd created my own heaven through mine. My promotion to brigadier general came after I successfully led a joint intelligence task force that disrupted a major terrorist financing network spanning 3 continents. The operation required months of careful planning and coordination with international partners, but resulted in the capture of dozens of high-value targets and the seizure of assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Brigadier General Hartwell represents the best of American military leadership, General Hayes said during my promotion ceremony. Her combination of tactical brilliance, strategic vision, and unwavering integrity makes her invaluable to our national security efforts. The promotion came with assignment as Commanding General of the Military Intelligence Training Center at Fort Devens, the same facility where I'd brought down my family's criminal enterprise, now under my complete command. The irony wasn't lost on me. The place where my parents had thought they could exploit their military daughter for personal gain had become the foundation of my rise to general officer rank. But more than personal satisfaction, the assignment represented an opportunity to implement the kind of training and leadership development programs I'd envisioned since my days as a cadet at Blackwater. I wanted to ensure that every intelligence officer who passed through Fort Devens understood not just the technical aspects of their profession, but the moral obligations that came with the power to influence life and death decisions. Under my leadership, the facility became known throughout the military as the premier center for ethical leadership development as well as technical training. We established the Warrior Scholar program that combined advanced academic study with practical field experience, producing intelligence officers who could think strategically while never forgetting their ultimate responsibility to the soldiers whose lives depended on their analysis. My personal life during this period was equally fulfilling. James and I had been blessed with twin daughters, Hope and Justice, names that reflected both our military values and our commitment to leaving the world better than we'd found it. Watching them grow and develop their own personalities provided a joy and sense of purpose that complemented rather than competed with my professional responsibilities. "They're going to be formidable women someday," James observed one evening as we watched 3-year-old Hope organizing her toys with military precision, while Justice focused intently on a picture book about airplanes. "God help anyone who tries to underestimate them," I replied, thinking of my own experiences with those who dismissed my potential. My promotion to Major General came with assignment as Commanding General of the Army Intelligence and Security Command, responsible for all Army intelligence operations worldwide. The position put me in charge of thousands of soldiers and civilians working on some of the nation's most sensitive national security challenges. But it also represented something more personal, the ultimate vindication of every choice I'd made since waking up in my 16-year-old body, with memories of betrayal and determination to rewrite my story. During my change of command ceremony, I looked out at an audience that included senior officials from across the government, international military attachés, and hundreds of soldiers whose careers I'd influenced over the years. In the front row sat General Morrison, now retired, but still the mentor whose belief in my potential had helped shape everything that followed. "Leadership isn't about commanding others," I said in my remarks to the assembled audience. "It's about serving something larger than yourself and ensuring that those who follow you have the opportunity to reach their own potential. Every soldier under my command represents unlimited possibilities, and my job is to help them realize those possibilities in service to our nation." After the ceremony, General Morrison approached me with a smile that carried decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. "I told you that you'd be a general someday," he said quietly as we stood together watching the reception that followed the formal ceremony. "But I have to admit, even I didn't anticipate how far you'd rise or how much good you'd accomplish along the way. Thank you, sir, for everything, for seeing something in me when no one else did, for giving me opportunities to prove myself, for teaching me that true leadership means lifting others up." "You taught me something too, Elena," he replied. "You taught me that sometimes the people who face the greatest challenges early in life develop the strongest character. Your parents thought they were punishing you by sending you away. Instead, they gave you the chance to become who you were meant to be." That evening, James and I stood on the balcony of our quarters overlooking Fort Belvoir, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Our daughters were asleep inside, exhausted from the excitement of the day's ceremonies and the attention of hundreds of well-wishers. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had been different?" James asked, his arm around my shoulders as we enjoyed one of our rare moments of complete peace. "Different how?" I replied, though I understood what he was asking. "If your family had supported you from the beginning, if you'd never faced the betrayals that shaped who you became, do you think you would have ended up here?" I considered the question seriously, thinking about the girl I'd been in my first life and the woman I'd become in my second. The pain and rejection that had nearly destroyed me initially had ultimately become the foundation for everything I'd built. "I don't think so," I said finally. "The challenges I faced taught me things about resilience, loyalty, and justice that I might never have learned otherwise. They taught me to value the people who stand by you when things are difficult, and to never take success for granted." "No regrets, then?" "None," I said firmly. "Every experience, even the painful ones, led me to this moment, to this life, to you and our daughters and the work we're doing to make the world safer and more just." As if summoned by our conversation, Hope appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes and clearly having awakened from a dream. "Mommy, I dreamed you were fighting bad guys and protecting people," she said, running to hug my legs. "Just a dream, sweetheart," I replied, lifting her up to join us on the balcony. "But sometimes dreams can show us what's important, taking care of the people we love and standing up for what's right." Justice appeared moments later, not wanting to be left out of whatever was happening. Soon we were all standing together under the stars, our family complete and our future bright with possibilities. 10 years have passed since that evening, and the life I've built continues to exceed anything I could have imagined in either of my lives. I now serve as a lieutenant general, commanding all Army intelligence operations, responsible for protecting American interests around the world and ensuring that our soldiers have the information they need to succeed in their missions. Under my leadership, we've revolutionized how the military investigates fraud and protects service members from exploitation. The Hartwell Protocols, named ironically after my family's case, have become the gold standard for contractor oversight and have prevented countless instances of the kind of corruption that once cost American lives. My personal achievements have been recognized with awards and honors that span the spectrum of military recognition. But the accomplishments I'm most proud of are the ones that can't be measured in ribbons and medals. The soldiers I've mentored who've gone on to successful careers of their own. The investigations that prevented fraud and saved lives. The programs that ensure military families receive the support and respect they deserve. And I've also used my position and growing influence to establish the Elena Morrison Foundation, named after my grandmother and General Morrison, the two people who believed in me when no one else would. The foundation provides full scholarships to military academy candidates from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that financial circumstances never prevent worthy young people from serving their country. To date, we've funded over 500 scholarships, with recipients going on to serve as officers throughout all branches of the military. Many have stayed in touch over the years, sharing stories of their own successes and challenges. Each letter reminds me that the ripple effects of opportunity and mentorship extend far beyond what we can see or measure. My parents and Marcus remain in federal prison, though their circumstances have changed significantly over the years. My father, now in his late 70s, has suffered multiple strokes that have left him partially paralyzed and requiring constant medical care. My mother's depression has deepened to the point where she rarely recognizes visitors or engages with the world around her. Marcus has found religion in prison, a common occurrence among inmates facing long sentences, and has written me several letters over the years requesting forgiveness and reconciliation. His most recent letter arrived last month, filled with biblical quotations and claims that he's become a different person through his suffering. I read each letter once, then filed them away without responding. Some people deserve second chances, but they are not among them. Their suffering in prison doesn't erase the suffering they caused others, and their belated remorse doesn't obligate me to provide the absolution they seek. Hope and Justice are now 13 years old, developing into the formidable young women James predicted they would become. Hope has inherited my strategic mind and tactical thinking, often approaching problems with a methodical analysis that reminds me of my own approach to challenges. Justice has her father's intuitive understanding of people and situations, combined with a fierce sense of right and wrong that I recognize from my own experience. Both girls understand that their mother has an important job that sometimes requires travel and long hours, but they also know that they are my highest priority and that everything I do professionally is ultimately in service of creating a better world for them to inherit. Mom, why do some people try to hurt soldiers? Justice asked me recently after overhearing a phone conversation about a new fraud investigation. Because some people care more about money than they do about doing what's right, I replied. They forget that soldiers are real people with families who love them, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's stupid, Hope declared with the certainty that only teenagers can muster. Don't they understand that soldiers protect everybody? Not everyone thinks as clearly as you do, I said, proud of their moral clarity, while hoping they would never have to learn firsthand how cruel and selfish people could be. This morning, I stood before a formation of new intelligence officers at Fort Devens, delivering a speech about honor, integrity, and the true meaning of service. Looking out at those young faces, I saw myself as I could have been in my first life, uncertain, overlooked, underestimated, and as I became in my second life through determination, hard work, and the support of people who believed in my potential. Never let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of greatness, I told them, the same words I'd spoken to countless young soldiers over the years. The only limits on your potential are the ones you accept for yourself. And remember, the best response to those who try to tear you down is building a life so successful, so meaningful, that their opinions become irrelevant. After the ceremony, I returned to my office to find my aide waiting with the day's briefings. Among them was a report on a new investigation into defense contractor fraud. Apparently, some companies hadn't learned the lesson my family's case was supposed to teach. I smiled as I reviewed the evidence, thinking about the young investigators who would cut their teeth on this case, just as I'd cut mine on more complex challenges years earlier. The cycle of mentorship and development continued, each generation building on the work of those who came before. But more than professional satisfaction, I felt the deep contentment that comes from knowing I'd used my impossible second chance wisely. The girl who died in that car crash 27 years ago had been powerless to prevent the injustices inflicted on her. The woman who'd taken her place had spent every day since then building the power and position necessary to ensure that similar injustices would never go unpunished. That evening, James and I attended a military ball at the Officers Club, one of dozens of formal events that filled our social calendar throughout the year. As we danced to music played by the Army Band, I reflected on how different this scene was from the military ball at Blackwater, where my parents had chosen to attend Marcus's awards ceremony instead. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noting my contemplative expression. "Just remembering how far we've come," I replied, "and thinking about how much farther we still have to go." "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing our conversation from years earlier. "None," I said, just as I had then. "Every experience led me here, to this moment, to this life with you and our daughters and the work we're doing together." As we continued dancing, I caught sight of my reflection in the ballroom's mirrors. A woman in dress blues with silver stars on her shoulders, surrounded by fellow officers who respected her judgment and trusted her leadership. The scared, broken girl my parents had tried to discard was nowhere to be seen. In her place stood someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's taking everything your enemies use to hurt you and turning it into the foundation for something they could never imagine achieving themselves. My parents had thought they were sending me away to disappear. Instead, they'd given me the opportunity to become everything they'd always claimed I could never be: strong, successful, respected, and completely beyond their reach. And every morning when I put on my uniform and pin my stars to my collar, I think about that scared, defeated girl who died in a car crash so many years ago. I think about how proud she would be to see what we became together, how amazed she would be to discover that her darkest moment became the catalyst for her greatest triumph. And then I get back to work because there's still so much left to build, so many young soldiers to mentor, so many wrongs to right. The second chance I'd been given wasn't just for my own benefit. It was an opportunity to ensure that others facing similar challenges would have advocates and protectors they could count on. The story of my revenge against my family was complete, but the story of the life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal was still being written. And every chapter promised new opportunities to transform pain into purpose, setbacks into strength, and the scars of the past into the foundation for a better future. My parents had tried to break me, but instead they'd forged me into something stronger than they could comprehend. The daughter they'd dismissed had become the woman who would define their legacy, not as successful business people or political operators, but as cautionary examples of what happened when greed and cruelty finally met justice. And justice, I'd learned, was always worth the wait.